Welcome to the A2 Show with Andrew Cass and Aaron Parkinson, bringing you the trends and topics that affect our lives the most: business, politics, fitness, family, and finance. With over 50 plus years of combined business experience and over $1 billion in revenue generated, your hosts have a unique gift for seeing many steps ahead where others do not. They bring their unfiltered, contrarian views to the show every week to help you win in business and in life.
Aaron, how are you, my man? We're talking content repurposing strategies today, a topic that I love because we're in a content-rich world where I think everybody's trying to play a big game of what media do I use and how do I leverage all this media out there. And I think sometimes it's actually a deer in headlights moment for many where there's so much that they don't know where to begin and there's really no clear strategy. So what we thought we'd do today is actually share with you guys the strategy that we use for the A2 show and how we pivoted from Sales Velocity TV, which we ran for almost 4 years successfully, and how we pivoted to a new brand and how we have a team that repurposes content and allows us now to take that content, multiply it, and we're even going to turn a lot of it into a physical book. And I think this is the stuff that you're like, wow, I'd love to be able to do all that, but I wouldn't know where to begin. So I guess we're going to open the playbook a little bit here today.
Yeah, and some people are going to go, oh my God, this is amazing. And some people are going to go, I don't know what you're talking about, and do I even need it? And the reality is that since the 50s, we've been conditioned to believe, trust, and buy from people the more times we see them on a screen.
Right.
So the idea is, how do we take something as our foundation where people hear us, see us on a screen, and take the effort that we've put into one thing and chop it up and multiply it into as many different resources as possible, so that regardless of how somebody likes to consume the information, we've got the right fit for them.
Right.
Because the more places that we can put the stuff and the more times that people can see us, the easier it is to make sales in our business, plain and simple.
Exactly right. And most of you watching the show, you plugged into Sales Velocity TV and radio for many, many, many years. We pivoted the show in early 2024 to the A2 show. It was a lot of development and rebranding. But what we realized when we did it, which is exciting for us, is we're sitting on something like 154 shows.
Yep.
Most people just go, well, the show was the show, it was cool, and they're on to the next one. So I think the big lesson I want to start with today, Aaron, is maybe slow down always the next one and focus on all you've done and all you have and what you can repurpose. So I think the big takeaway today will be repurposing content. I'll give you a couple examples. I'll give you one big one. Whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter. But Joel Osteen is probably the biggest pastor, Christian, personal development speaker, whatever you want to call him in the world, right?
He's the one that I see the most for sure.
He's the one that you see the most for sure. He put something like 40,000 people in a room on a Sunday morning for 1 hour in Houston, Texas. I mean, the place is, I think he might have bought the old Compaq Center where the Houston Rockets played. Crazy, right? I mean, what a business model that is, right? So not a religious point here, but the point I'm trying to make is the following in the content. So for 1 hour every single Sunday, he does a speech, a sermon, whatever you want to call it. And it's, it's good. It's really helpful for spirit and mind and whatever. Okay. Now, what happens after he's done and he steps off the stage is he has a team that goes to work on that 145-minute sermon. And here's what happens every single year. First and foremost, it becomes a podcast. So that spot from stage is a podcast. And then every single year, like clockwork, that becomes a book. So 52 weeks a year, he never misses a year. 52 pieces of content from stage, 52 podcast episodes, 52 blog posts, I'm sure they transcribe them, and 52 pieces of content that become a best-selling book every single year. New York Times contracts, the whole 9 yards. Boom, done. From one 45-minute talk, the only thing he does, because I'm the kind of guy that likes to dissect the business model and the industry behind what's going on. So I'm like, what does Joel Osteen do? Really, his whole thing is just being on for Sunday. He's almost like in baseball, the starting pitcher who pitches once a week and he gets paid the most amount of money to go in and strike a bunch of people out. His job is just once a week. He needs to go in and get that win. And that guy is the highest paid player on a baseball team because that's good for 25 wins. which is a quarter of the season for them, right? When you think about it from a baseball standpoint. So he's surgical, and they protect him and insulate him. He's not writing anything. He isn't answering emails. He's probably not hosting training calls the next week. He's preparing every single week for Sunday. So he's basically preparing a speech for Sunday all week long because he knows the power of repurposing and multiplication. That's the big lesson. So most of you are doing something regularly, routinely. Using us as an example, we're doing 1 to 2 shows a week. So if you have that platform, whether it be podcast, TV, radio, blog post, Zoom training, right? Think about this as, is there anything that I'm doing that I can start to formalize and repurpose it and start to make a content information business out of it? That's a good example, Joel. Now, you and I are doing the show 1 to 2 days per week. What did we do with Sales Velocity TV? We're going to talk about the book we're creating now from all the content. So, Aaron, I wanted to just set the stage with, this is a repurposing play. It's a multiplication play. And I want you to think about how to do more with what you already have before you just shelf it, put it aside, and go on to the next thing and not really embrace what you have and repurpose what exists.
Well, and everything you just said there makes complete sense. The one thing I would do is I would take a step back. You know, a couple of years ago, you and I said, you know, we have to have a podcast. We have to have somewhere where we can create content. You know, we needed to have the stage. In this example, we needed to have the Joel Osteen stage for 45 minutes a week,
right?
So that we would have enough content to repurpose. And I think this is where a lot of people get stuck, is they think to themselves, well, I don't want to do a show. I don't want to do a podcast. I don't want to do an XYZ, insert your element here, because nobody's going to show up and watch it, and that's going to be embarrassing, and that's not good for my ego. And I can't tell you how
that's
many
a really good
people
observation.
I've talked to so many people where, you know, they've done maybe 4 or 5. Remember when Facebook Lives were really big?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We actually started our Sales Velocity show in the beginning, going live in Facebook on Fridays, and then from there we would just pivot the content, right? Good point.
And the reality is that not that many people show up until you've been doing it for a long time. In fact, most of the people who consume our content consume it on the podcast networks, right, like Spotify and Apple.
Yep.
And they do it whenever they feel like it after the fact. There's very few people who show up live, but there's this feeling like if I'm going to show up and do something live, somehow there has to be a lot of people that are willing to watch it live for me to justify doing it. And the reality is that's completely wrong. And so you and I, we looked at what everybody else was doing, and there were some people doing some really talented things where they were flying these great guests into these great studios and putting on this great production. And we said, hey, as beautiful as that is, we don't really want to have the responsibility of outreach and flights and hotels and production and all. Why don't we just get on once a week and talk like we normally talk, because we usually talk once a week about these topics just because we're friends and we catch up. And instead of just talking about it, let's just film it. And so there's got to be somebody in your network that also wants the same thing. They want to have a stack of content that they can be repurposing, where you could just say, hey, let's get on and let's just talk for an hour about whatever we want to talk about and just get the content out. I mean, we have a client, a former client, that you'll remember the name of the show. I can't remember. It was something like Finance and Wine or something like that. What was the?
I remember that coaching client we had. Yes, he was a financial advisor.
Yes.
And he was somehow doing a podcast, but he always had a bottle of wine with him during it, and they were drinking during the show, and it was Wine and Finance or something.
Yeah, it was, I can't remember.
Just something like a pattern interrupt, something catchy.
It was Wine and something. And they would talk about like investments and markets and whatever, and they'd basically just get drunk on the show. And I think where it sort of came from is they were saying like, hey, we get together and drink wine and hang out and talk about this stuff anyway. Let's just do it on a show. And then you've got the foundational content. Because here's the thing. You do 1 hour of conversation, whether that's, like Andrew said, a training video, a podcast, a YouTube tutorial, like whatever it is that you want to do. If you can put that into your calendar once a week, there is so much content that can be stripped out of that and repurposed. It's just about, it's literally just about doing it. It's about putting it in your calendar and finding a way to get started and do it. Because from there, everything that happens after that is compounded by like level 100.